Well, isn't that a great story? Isn't that a great story? And, in so many ways, that's what this series is about. It's about parenting and grandparenting our kids and our grandkids so that they will grow up and become healthy, well-adjusted individuals who are adults that we can then, invite to go out on their own, right? They get to go out on their own. Because that's a really good thing. Because when that happens, then we have a chance as parents and grandparents to have a really healthy relationship that's ongoing, but it's more about a friendship that we have with them. And that's healthy. Now, last week I talked some about this dynamic that Scripture talks about. We have dominion. And we talked a lot about what does it mean to parent in a way that we help our kids understand their dominion and what they can do with their dominion. Dominion, of course, is all about authority, that we were made in God's image, and with that we were given authority, and with authority comes what? Responsibility, responsibility. And so we talked about parenting our kids to be able to handle that as they grow up. Now, there's another component that is related very closely to dominion that is very scriptural, that comes out of actually Genesis as well, and we're going to look at that here in a moment. And that is this idea that we all have a will. Your children, your grandchildren have a will. And so today we want to talk primarily about how do you help your children to be able to handle their will, because that's really important. Now, oftentimes when we think about the will in a Christian setting, we think of that as a negative thing. That's a bad thing. If you've got a willful child, that's bad. You want to get rid of the willfulness in your child or whatever. But I want you to look at that in maybe a new way, that will isn't all bad. Of course, bad things can happen out of your will, my will, our kids' will. But I want you to think of the will as being a part of how God made us. Now, I've talked about this in the past. Remember, God made us with a soul. And our soul, right, there's no place in us that you can look and say, there's your soul. You can't put your finger on your soul. Rather, when we think of the soul from a scriptural standpoint, the soul is the integration of all the things that make you, you. Okay, from a biblical perspective, all the things that come together to make you, you. Things like your spirit, your heart, your mind. And when the Bible talks about the mind, it often includes both the intellect and the emotions and the will. And so we are soul creatures, and our soul is the integration of all those things that come together. And one of those things is the will. And understand that was God's design, that we would have a will, okay? When you think of the biblical understanding of a will, think of it in this way. It is your capacity to choose. Your capacity to choose. And God intended for our will to be that thing that could govern our mind and our body, okay? So it can do good things in our life, and it can do bad things in our life. I want to give you just a little bit of background on this. If you have your Bibles and you want to, flip with me over to Genesis chapter 2. And we see this concept introduced in Genesis chapter 2, in the second creation narrative that occurs in Genesis 2. God goes through, creates all this stuff. He's created man. And now we get to the very end of the creation here. And look at verse 18. It says, the Lord God said, it is good for, look at verse 19, wrong verse. Verse 19. Now the Lord had formed out of the ground all the beasts of the field and all the birds of the air. He brought them to the man to see what he would name them. Now, pause there for just a moment. Why does God bring all the animals to man and says, I brought them to you to see what you would name them? Now, did God get tired all of a sudden? Is he like, oh man, you cannot believe how much energy it takes to make a star. And I've been making lots of them lately, right? And I'm just worn out, okay? No, that's not what's going on. Is he tapped out creatively? Is he like, I've been making animals that fly and swim and crawl and walk and run and just, I'm out of good ideas on this thing. I can't think of a name right now. I'm all tapped out creatively. Adam, can you help me out on the naming thing here? Is that what's going on? No. Here's what's happening. I want you to think about this. God makes male and female to have dominion, and a part of their dominion, to be able to exercise that dominion, means they've got to have room to choose to do things in this world. And what God is doing in this moment is asking humanity to join him almost as a co-creator in this moment. And in this moment, what he lays before humanity is the opportunity to use their will. And that's a good thing. I want you to think about this. There's a very good side to our will. Your will is what gives you the capacity to be creative. Your will is part of what drives you. It's in touch with your passion, what gives you drive for life. Have you ever thought about this? It is your will that gives you the drive to live a value-centered life. If you made the choice to say, I don't want to just live by every single whim, I don't want to live by every single temptation that comes my way, I want to be a principled person. It's your will that's given you the ability to both desire that and to live that out, to be a value-driven person or a principle-oriented person. See, the will, right, that's a good thing. That when you see our worship team up here and they're using their creativity to draw that into worship, whether it's with lighting or music or instrumentation or whatever it is, that is such a beautiful part of what you were created to be. And it's your will that helps you to use your creativity, your passions, and your drives to make decisions about how you're going to use your mind and your body. Good thing, isn't it? Now, the problem is, right? The problem is that's not the end of the story. The problem is we live in a fallen world where our wills are a part of that fallenness. It's like our will can work against itself. It's like there's moments when our will, instead of operating well and smoothly with our mind, our emotions, our intellect, our body, our spirit, our heart, it's like it works against it. It pulls us into turmoil. It pulls us, tempts us, leads us into places that we would look at and not want to go. And yet it's like we're at war with ourselves. Paul describes this really, really well. I want to show you this real quickly here. Look at Romans, if you want. Romans chapter 7. Romans chapter 7, look at verse 21. Paul gives such great description to this. He says this, so I find this law at work. There's something going on. There's a system at work in my life, he's saying. When I want to do good. Now, underline the word I want. And here's why. That's the will. Paul's talking about the will in this moment. I want. The will is what governs our appetites, desires, passions, drives, okay? Creativity. He says, I want to do good. Evil is right there with me. For in my inner being, and now he's alluding and describing these deeper parts, right? Elements of our soul, heart, our spirit, intellect, different parts of who we are. He says, for in my inner being, I delight in God's law, right? We all experience that part. And then he goes on, but I see another law at work in the members of my body, waging war against the law of the mind and making me a prisoner of the law of sin at work within my members. He goes on, describes this more, but here's what I want you to get. He describes our dilemma so well. Our will, in some ways, is a bit of a loose cannon in our lives, right? Because we live in a fallen world. And part of growing up, part of maturing spiritually is learning how to deal with our will. So here's what I want to deal with here this morning is talking about this issue of how do we raise children that are, how do we best equip our children to understand and deal with their will? Because they have a will. And if we neglect that, something's going to happen with that will as they grow up. So what can we do to help our children understand the choices that they make and all the things that are going to be going on inside of them? Now, to get at this a little bit, I want to use a continuum here that kind of flows out of what we've been doing with this whole series. So if you look up at this at the screen here, here's our child, our grandchild. The dot at the left, they're born, they become a child, they grow up, young adult, okay? Now, if we want to have an effect on their will in life, there are several things that I want us to think about here this morning. Go to the next slide here. The first one here is what we might get them to do, right? When they're really young, there's going to be moments where we need them to obey. We want them to learn that there are are moments in life where obedience is the right thing, that there are boundaries. Oftentimes, this is for their safety, and we're going to do our best to cultivate them to obey in the right moments. Now, here's the thing though. So often, Christian families, okay, this in particular, Christian families, we don't see how there really needs to be a change from this. And what I want to say, what I want to introduce to you here this morning is not that obey is a bad thing, but we need to be getting them to grow into something much deeper and at a very early age. Studies have shown that even at the age of 1 or 2, beginning to introduce your children to a new way is very important. And what I'm going to call that new way, this is my language, is just learning about life. There are moments when they don't need to just obey, they need to understand. They need to understand. They need to understand those values that we speak of. They need to understand the principles that we're asking them to obey or to live by. And if they never understand those things, then someday they're going to make choices. And if they don't understand, they're going to be making choices about morals and values they don't understand. So what we want to do really early in their lives is to get them to a place where they really begin learning about this. And ultimately, when they become an adult and they leave the house and they're on their own, we want those values and those principles to be internalized. We want them to be in operation in our adult child's life, even when they're not aware of it. We want it to become central to their life. So there are different roles that we can play in this. Go ahead and go to the next slide here. We can take the role of an authority, and you know what? When you want compliance, when you just want someone to obey, you can use your authority. When you're a parent and your child's small, you're going to use authority, and that works well. But here's the deal. As your child grows older and older, authority is going to work less and less. In fact, your authority, you're going to have to ramp your authority up more and more and more. You're going to have to put more oomph and power behind it to get the same thing. And if at an early age, you can begin using less authority, and it's not that there will be times even with your teenager that you're going to say, I'm the authority in this house, and here's what's going to happen, okay? But the more you have to use that, the less your children are really learning about life. And again, my word here, but the more as parents and grandparents we can get into the role of mentoring, the better off we're going to be, because mentors help people learn. Mentors help people learn for themselves. And if they're going to know what to do with their will, they've got to be the kind of adults that can learn from themselves and don't have to always have someone around them teaching them, showing them exactly what to do in any moment. Because ultimately what we're trying for here is we want to become their friend. We want to become their friend. We want them, we don't want to be taking care of them anymore. We want them to be their own well-adjusted adult who can handle life on their own, and then we get to be their friend. Which leads to the last thing here, what we can employ here in these different roles. So go to the next one here. Okay, so if we want compliance and we're operating as an authority, we can there's punishment. We can use punishment. Now, here's the thing about punishment. Let me define this here. Punishment, when we think of punishment here this morning, I want you to think of punishment is a fair and just penalty for what you've done wrong, okay? If you do something wrong, there can be a fair penalty and think of it in this way, to pay for what you did wrong. You go out and break the law, do something wrong, and the police show up at your house and handcuff you, you go to trial, and you're convicted. There's a judge somewhere that in that moment gets to hand out a fair penalty for you to pay for what you did wrong. Now, here's the deal. Punishment can work well for compliance. You can jack up punishment high enough to get some sort of compliance some of the time, but it doesn't always work. But here's the other thing. Punishment rarely teaches much at all. It confines people. And so here's what I want to introduce to you this morning is the idea of consequences. Consequences, let me define consequences in this way. Consequences are the natural result of what happens based on one of my actions, okay? Consequences are the natural thing that happen in life. Consequences teach us to think. Consequences force us to understand that there's a connection between what I experience right now and my own behaviors and choices. That's how we want our kids to begin thinking, because you know what's going to happen? When they leave us and go out into the real world, right? Because that's what's going to happen. They're going to go into the real world. You know what they experience in the real world? Reality. Yeah, reality. Reality has a sick way of running us straight in the face, right? Reality, we want them ready for reality in there. So that's what we're going to kind of walk through here. Now, to do this, and we want to get ultra practical, I'm going to ask my wife, Angie, to come out here and help me with this, because we're going to be really practical with this. And there are a couple of reasons why I want her to come out here and help me with this. Thank you for doing this. One of them is she's the mother of my children, and she has something to say about this whole parenting thing. The other one is...
That's a full-time job.
Yes. The other one is, and many of you may know this, I think most of you probably know this, Angie is in the midst of earning her master's and PhD in forensic psychology. She is studying to be, you ever watch Silence of the Lambs?
No.
Are you going to be Clarice? Is that what's going to happen?
No.
I think that's what's happening. I think that's where this is all headed. The FBI is going to be calling, and she's going to go out and anyhow, I don't want to know. I don't want to know. I've heard too many stories already. But with her study, her background, she's also in the midst of a fantastic internship here with a forensic psychologist here in Arizona. And she actually is participating in some of this stuff. She goes to court every once in a while. She goes to jail and is helping with these tests and evaluations. The kids love this. The kids, like when she goes and does this, our kids, like someone will call, can you come over today? No, I can't do that. My mom's in jail. They're like, really well. Yeah, and they tell the teachers and they freak everyone out all the time. It's great fun. In fact, I knew we needed to have Angie help me with this when a couple months ago we're sitting at the breakfast bar in our house. We're eating breakfast, and Angie and I are having kind of a come to Jesus talk with our kids I think it was over responsibility with their chores and stuff. And Angie kicks into forensic psychologist mode here on this thing. She goes, if you don't become responsible with your chores, the next thing you know, you're going to become a murderer, a jaywalker. You're going to lie at school.
They all
I think we could get the kids on video. We could do a video next week with the kids. I think it's murderer. What was the next one?
Jaywalker.
Yeah, murderer, jaywalker, run a red light, something like that. And Chandler goes, you started with murderer. We know what you're all about, what you want to do. So anyhow, but with some of that background and the research that you've done, just felt like it'd be really important to have her here as a part of that. And we want to just be ultra practical. So why don't you start walking us through some of these points about how to parent in a way that helps our kids deal with their will.
Okay.
I'm going to scoot next to you. Can I do that?
Yes. Well, the first one that Glenn kind of started talking about was allowing the consequences to be the teacher. When we use consequences instead of punishment, I mean, there's a time for punishment, but when you allow consequences to be the teacher, our kids learn about life, and that's our ultimate goal. When we punish our kids, we're giving them a way out from learning. They don't have to learn anything when we punish them. They don't have to learn anything about real life. Think about it. They can actually think about it and kind of deliberate. Do I want to do that? Is it kind of worth it? Maybe I will do that. And we don't want that. We want them to learn about real life, not about what's going to come down the path if they choose, this.
Give them the story about the tricycle girl.
The little girl on the tricycle. This is a great illustration. Probably a lot of you have already heard it, but you can picture this little girl. She's on a tricycle, and she's riding around her little ponytails, going like this, and she looks really cute. And her mom comes out, and her mom says, now, little Susie, you may go down the road this far, but if you go any further, like past the mailboxes, I'm going to have to spank you. And little Susie looks at her, and she's like, well, you might as well spank me now because I got places to go, So she's already waited out, She knows where she wants to go with this.
So in your illustration, I want you to think about this. If that's fine for little Susie. If that's your little girl and there's a punishment attached with if you go too far. But play that out. What if this is your daughter and now she's grown to become a teenager and the temptation before her, the challenge to her will isn't will she ride her tricycle past the mailboxes? Now the temptation is she's being introduced to marijuana or drugs. And she right now is using her ability to choose, to decide, will I experiment with this or not? Do you want your daughter in that moment to go, if you get caught trying marijuana at school, I'll get kicked out for a week. Now, is it worth the price to be kicked out of school for a week to try this? We'll see. You don't want your daughter trying to determine whether or not experimenting with marijuana is worth the price of being suspended for a week. What we really want is for our children, our grandchildren, if that's your daughter, you want her looking at the consequences. You want her to, in that moment, to say, you know what? If I try this at this moment, this could end badly. What if this is the first step to an addiction that destroys my college plans? What if this destroys a career that I'm excited about, that I want to be? What if this dramatically changes my life in painful ways? See, wouldn't you want your daughter as a teenager weighing the consequences, thinking through this, rather than just saying, well, if I get caught, here's what I have to pay to be able to do this. And how would you, give an example here of like with a little kid, the same thing, like how would you change the thing with Susie, or what's another example with like a small kid?
I mean, probably a great one would be when we experience snow in Tucson, it's like this great big deal, and so we plan these trips up to Mount Lemmon, and we're gonna make a family time out of it, and we get all the snow gear together, and we get up to Mount Lemmon, and you give little Johnny a chance to you can have this coat or you can have this coat. Which one would you like? And you're thinking, this is so nice of me, I'm giving them a choice. And little Johnny's like, I don't want either. And you're just like, oh, well, now what do I do? It's minus 30 degrees or whatever, outside. And so you have a chance right now. You can choose to be their teacher and say, let me tell you about when this, the cold air hits your skin at, 29 degrees, blah, 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 blah. You can teach them something. Or you can try and convince them, this is not a good idea. Or you can please, that's Glenn. Please.
I just got thrown under the bus.
No, you said it last time. Last week you said that.
Yeah. It was only that one time. Do I do that all the time?
Said, okay, test. Who was here last week? Didn't he say that? He said he was like the negotiator.
I don't see a hand. Sorry.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, I'm the pleader, the bargainer. Yes,
whatever you want to call it. Okay. So you're trying to get them to do something that way, or you can power up on them. You can say, you're not going out in the snow unless you put your coat on. Okay. You can power up on them and do that, or you can let the consequence do the teaching. So what does that look like? That's really hard. That's counterintuitive to what we want to do. At least for me as a mom, this is very counterintuitive. We can let them go outside without their coat on. They might even be, in short sleeves, because this has happened in our house. I'm not going to point fingers, but we'll have shorts and short sleeves on, and we can go outside in the snow. And what happens? They will enjoy the snow for about 5 minutes because it's neat. It's new and it's exciting. And then 5 minutes starts getting pretty cold, and they get wet. I'm so cold. My fingers are red. I can't feel them. That kind of thing. And you can. This is great. You can say, man, you know what? I would be cold too if I didn't have a jacket on. I'm really sorry that you're cold. You know what? We'll be warm in a few hours when we get back down to the mountain, back home. I'm serious. But what's neat is right there. What have you done besides make them cold? You've given them a gift. You've given them a chance to learn that their will is very important. They have a chance to exert their will to make an effect on their life, that they have that power to do that.
And that gift gives them the opportunity to learn from the consequences of that. And it sounds harsh.
It does. It is.
But it's wonderful for you as a parent or a grandparent. And here's why. I think I love your illustration there, because and again, not that any of this has ever happened in our family whatsoever, but in the moment when I become the bargainer parent, the pleading parent, I'm the one lining up against their will. I'm the one trying to go against their will. You need to do this, and then I can switch. You're gonna do this. And the whole time I'm going like this. Now, what are they doing? Are they learning in that moment? No, their energy, their will is focused on resisting us in this moment. But when you come alongside them and, in an hour or two, you'll be warm. Yeah, man, I feel for you. In that moment, they are beginning to think about their actions, their choices produce something in their life that they didn't like. The cold is what's becoming the teacher in their life. Let me give you an example from my life, okay? This is a really good one. My dad gave me one of these great gifts when I was in high school. I wanted to buy this little sports car that I thought was so cool.
And it wasn't cool, but that's
it was cool. You just had to have vision.
I'm sorry.
If you had vision, you would know this is a cool car. my dad said to me, that's probably a big money pit. It's going to break down all the time. It's going to cost you a lot of money. It's going to make you miserable. Oh, no, I want this car. And I wanted that car so bad. Well, you know what? At that point, my dad could have said, nope. I get to use authority here. You're still in my household. You're not going to get the car because I know it's a bad decision. And you know what? It was a bad decision. But here's the gift my dad gave me. He let me make that bad decision. And instead of me going, oh, my dad's so mean. He wouldn't let me have the car I always wanted, and I was willing to pay for it, and he still wouldn't let me do it. Instead, I bought a money pit of a car, and it drained all of my money. It broke down. It left me stranded. But that was a great lesson for me about the consequences of my choices. I really learned something out of that. And so as parents, whenever we can begin using natural consequences as the teacher, our kids are learning. It's a powerful thing to do. Now, sometimes we talked about this as well. Sometimes natural consequences are hard to find, right? Especially when you're a mom and you've got a car full of rowdy kids that are their blood sugar's low and they're fighting with each other and they start saying things that they shouldn't say to one another and to you. Yeah.
That's marriage.
And there's not a natural consequence in that moment that you can lean on. And I loved how you framed this out, was that sometimes we need to create an imposed consequence. Sometimes we need to find a consequence that more of our choosing that we impose on them. That's different than a punishment, right? A punishment is just you did something wrong and you're going to pay for it. A consequence is about getting them to learn and own it here. So an imposed consequence on something relational, like they're mistreating you, right? They're saying things that you're not allowed to say. And in our family, Angie and I have talked about this. They're allowed to be angry. We're allowed to be angry at them. They can be angry at us. But in our anger, what we're not allowed to do in our family is use cutting words. We're not allowed to intentionally inflict pain on one another out of our anger, but we're allowed to be angry. So if one of our kids does inflict some pain on us or one of their siblings, we only have two, so it only goes one. Yeah. How do you impose something like that? Any thoughts on that? Want me to do this?
I have a ton of ideas,
Give us one. What would be like an example of an imposed consequence?
Well, we've done this before where we'll be, we've planned a date or something like that. Or actually, I should say a family time where we want to go to, dinner and a movie or something like that. And, they've been horrid all day long.
That's a technical theological term. Horrid.
I shouldn't say that. They're not taking this right now, are they? Anyway,
I'll be replaying it someplace for sure.
Anyway, so they're not very nice, and they're treating each other not very nice, and they're not treating me very nice. It's kind of that sass. They get that sass, the attitude. See, she said this, he did this, da, 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 da. So there's no good relational, connectedness going on between the kids or between me and the kids. And I come home and I know my hair's standing up like this, and Glenn's like, oh, she's not good. And so we have decided that this is about them, and they need to learn that they have made this relationship difficult, and that's not okay. It's not okay to violate a relationship between each other, and it's not okay to violate a relationship between me or Glenn or whoever, as the parent. So the natural consequence, or the imposed consequence at that point was, we were going to go out anyway. But you know what? You kind of make it miserable. We didn't say it this way, but they make it miserable. So what we decided was, you know what? We came to them, and you can honestly say, you know what? The way that you treated us and the way you treated each other wasn't okay. And we want to go out and have a good time like we were going to have, at the movie or dinner or whatever. And so we're going to go do that. And we're sorry you have to stay home. And we're going to get a babysitter because you can't stay by yourselves. Our kids are older now, but at this time. So you actually have to pay for the babysitter, and we'll figure that out later. But, it can come out of your allowance, whatever. You can work it off. I got lots of chores for you. You can work it off, whatever. But the point is that they had to learn, okay, relationally we're not connected, and that's a consequence of that because we didn't treat each other right. And mom and dad want to have a good relational time, as a family should be. And so they kind of learn it through that, I think.
So again, it creates that connection that their choices, and this is about their will. What they're learning is how I handle my will matters to me. And I need to think through it. Now, the other thing with this too, the great thing about imposed consequences is that you don't have to act in the moment. Sometimes when your kids are going crazy and your amygdala's hijacked and you're like, "Ugh." And sometimes as Christian parents, we think really good Christian parents know exactly what to do all the time, right in the moment. Not true. Sure not true with me. And the great thing about an imposed consequence is you can just tell them in that moment, you know what? I don't know what to do right now, but you've crossed a line and there will be some consequences. I've just got to go think through what they're going to be. And you know what? The first time you do that, they're going to look at you and go, that's a dog without teeth, And it's going to be like, Dad's scum. He's going to go think about it, right? Right?
Especially with you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I threw you under the bus.
You've gotten kind of a lot easier going in this service.
So it's really fun. I'm really sorry.
That's right. She's getting out of her box on this service. I don't know. Do I have a signal for cutting off her mic if this really comes down to it? I don't know. I didn't mean that. Okay, where was I? Where was consequences? Consequences to your actions, your words, maybe. I don't know. Anyhow. Oh yeah. So after the first time, you really do come back and you say, here are the consequences, and they're connected to your choices. Then I promise you, the time after that, and the third time after that, and you say, you know what? You're driving me crazy on this, and I've got to go back and get settled down, but you did cross the line, and there will be consequences to your choices. Then you know what happens? They go, oh my gosh, what could it be? And what
it's awesome, actually.
Yeah, and not in a mean way. Not in a mean way.
Well, it kind of is.
I think.
Okay, never mind. I'll claim it for me.
Yeah. Not me. Here's where I was driving on this deal. Okay,
sorry.
Is they're thinking now? You've got your kids thinking, right? And that's what you want. People who understand how to handle their will, as we mature spiritually and begin understanding how to handle our will, that comes, right? Paul even talks about this, by the renewing of your mind. There's a mind thing involved here. And we're training our kids, we're helping them teach themselves how to renew their mind, how to think in these moments. And I have no idea where we are in the notes right now. So
we're good.
Okay, you take over.
Point.
Okay, go.
Okay. So the last one is rejoice and empathize. And the thing with this one, if we could say anything, if you could take anything away from this sermon, it would be these 2 points: rejoice and empathize with your children. And I want to start with, there was a man named Bowlby that did some research on some children, and he actually took groups of children and studied a parental bond. He called it attachment. And he wanted to understand how a child attached to the parent. And what he found was he grouped them into about 4 categories, and 3 of which those categories were insecurely attached, kids that were not attached in a very healthy way to their parents. The other one was securely attached, where there was a really good bond between the parent and the child. And there were a number of reasons for that, but two of really important reasons were rejoice and empathize. And he kind of talked about it with rejoice, kind of as joy, being, enjoying your child or being joyful or things like that. And what it is it's things like, wow, you did it. You did a really good job. That's so cool. I really think you're really neat about this or whatever. And that child is learning, wow, I'm really special. I'm really loved and I'm worthy of something. I can go out in the world, and they kind of have some self-confidence from that. And then the empathy piece is when the child was able to come to the parent if they were hurt, physically or emotionally or whatever, in whatever way they were wounded. And the parent was able to say, you know what, it's okay, and they were able to comfort them, empathize with them. And that really took a lot of, it takes away stress, and it kind of how you would term it is they don't have that distress in their lives. It takes away anxiety and depression is what they're finding later in life in the children, if that makes sense.
So and I thought that was really interesting when she was first telling me about that study, the role of empathy, because, and maybe just as a guy, I just never thought of as empathy as being something that would really be connected to helping your child make choices or to understand their will, but it creates a kind of attachment, a healthy attachment that allows them to venture out. They feel that, right? Like a security to go out, which in effect is them making choices to go out on their own, to use their own creativity, their own passions, their own drives about life.
Right.
So think about this in terms of parenting now. Think about this in terms of parenting. You've got your children, your grandchildren, maybe you're an aunt or an uncle, something like that. And think of this idea that your job is to rejoice and empathize. Rejoice and empathize. That is your job when it comes to the choices that your children and grandchildren are making. So let's say your grandchild makes a choice, and it's more of a benign choice. It's a choice of preference. Celebrate it, rejoice in it. If they're kind of torn between two toys, let's say it's a young child, right? And sometimes children get fixated. They want both toys and they don't, which is the right one? And you back off and you're like, I'm not going to choose for you. You choose. And when they choose, and it doesn't matter which toy they choose, celebrate it. Celebrate what they've done, whether maybe it's family activities, celebrate what they've done. And the reason I say that is oftentimes, and I see this a lot as a pastor, oftentimes in Christian families, kids get raised with a notion that there's always one right answer to everything they face. And that's just not true in this world. And oftentimes they become adults who are paralyzed in making choices about anything because they're so afraid that somehow they're going to make a wrong choice and that will be a sin. And I'm here to tell you, you can pick any kind of ice cream you want. You can pick whatever kind of car you want to drive. There are so many choices that are Adam, you go name the animals whatever you want. I'm rejoicing in watching you use your will. See, exercise that. That is a good thing. Now, sometimes there are going to be good choices that they make that are moral choices, right? There was some temptation that they were faced with a friend or at school or on the computer or something, and they make the right choice and they push back temptation. Celebrate it. Celebrate how they used their will in a really good way in those moments. Build that up. Now, that's the rejoice side of it. The other side of it, right, is where it starts getting tough. And that's when they make a bad choice. And our job as parents and grandparents here is to empathize. Lay out the consequence. You got to lay out the consequence, a natural consequence if possible, if not, an imposed consequence. And now, instead of coming at your kid and saying, man, you blew that one. That was so wrong. I told you so. I knew better than that. I warned you. And now, because if you come at them that way, right, you're not empathizing. You're showing them. And we think in those moments when they're suffering from those consequences, I got to drive the lesson deep. I got to be that good Christian dad or mom, and I got to drive the lesson really deep so that they'll get it. If you're trying to drive that lesson deep in that moment, all you're doing is you are becoming the adversary with them in that moment.
And that's the part that isn't empathetic. That in the study that we were talking about earlier is the empathetic piece is being kind of coming alongside your child, not against them.
That's right. So in a sense, like Romans, Paul talks about this. He says, mourn with those who mourn, rejoice with those who rejoice. And in a crazy way, that's all this is. You're coming alongside your child and you're saying, man, I empathize with what you're experiencing, namely pain of some sort, with the consequences of your choice. I can feel for how this would be difficult. And what happens then is now the consequence, the pain becomes the teacher that's driving the lesson deep. You become the supporter. And kind of what Angie was talking about with that study is now you're becoming the mentor. You're becoming the one with the right kind of attachment that they're going to lean on. They will want to learn more from you in that. Any other thoughts on that? We probably don't have time to do the last
No, I just
hey
think
dude
that
thing there.
The empathy piece that, everybody was laughing when we were talking about like the snow. It's like, oh, you'll be warmer in 3 hours. Well, you really do have to honestly mean that. Like, I am sorry that you're cold and that you will be warm in 3 hours, or sorry that you have to pay for a babysitter. That really stinks. Like, and it's hard sometimes to have that empathy piece. And so just on a spiritual note for me, personally, I have to ask God, I'm like, you know what? I don't have any empathy right now. And it just feels good to say, and I told you so, I'm glad you're cold. And it's going to be 3 hours and I'm going to turn on the air conditioning, like something like that. And I'm like,
all the teenagers right now are going, wow, my mom looks really good.
That's not funny. Sorry.
We'll be doing our marriage series a little later than normally scheduled. Got to work a few things out.
Anyway. No, but in all honesty, because as a parent, I really do want to have empathy. I want my kids to learn from me that, we all make bad choices. I make bad choices, and I need people to come along and say, gosh, I'm really sorry that you're hurting. I'm sorry for where you are, like Glenn said about Romans, that we need to come alongside each other and encourage each other. So I think that that's really important. And then lastly, if you can get your kids to look at their choices and say, oh my gosh, I'm right here where I am right now because of the choices that I made. If you can get them to see that, that's powerful. You've really, really helped them to do something. We're all sitting here where we are from some choices that we've made. So I think if we can get our kids to see that, that's a real gift.
That's right. So when it comes to cultivating our child's will, let the consequences do the teaching. And if you have to, use imposed consequences that are connected to their choices. And then lastly, your job, my job, her job is rejoice and empathize. Rejoice and empathize. If you can just get into that mode that in my parenting and grandparenting, my role is to set up the consequences, rejoice and empathize, rejoice and empathize. That will go so far in helping your child or grandchild understand how to use their will for the long term. And let me add this one note too. There's just one quick thing that I'm going to add here. I didn't say, but in the end,
is this okay for you to say? I don't.
In the end, your children have their own will. You may do a lot of things right, parents. And your kids have their own will, and they may end up choosing things that break your heart or go the wrong direction. But in the end, they must own it. They must own it. We are creatures with a free will, and that is a good thing, but it's also a dangerous thing. And our job as parents is to set them up. At the end of the day, we don't own their will. We're not it. They own that themselves, but we can do so much to help them with that. Well, recommend the book.
Really quick.
It's a really good book.
This book was actually recommended to me, or both of us, when we were raising our kids, and it's called Parenting with Love and Logic. Fabulous book. A lot of what we talked about today, you can find in this book. It's just been a great resource for us. We've really, really enjoyed it. So this is going to be, did Jack say
I believe you can find the link to like Amazon.com for this book off of the Casas app. in there. If not, we'll put it on the blog, but whatever. Love and Logic, if you Google that, you'll get it. Well, let me say a prayer to end the sermon time, and then Andy's going to come out and close our service. So let me pray. Father, we thank you for the gift of children and grandchildren in our lives, and we also pray for wisdom and insight and strength to parent and grandparent them in ways that really honor what a tremendous gift they are. And we pray for an extra measure of